All right, guys. Tonight we're going to talk about crappie. And crappie is probably, well, it is one of America's favorite fish. I enjoy catching them. I enjoy taking kids out to catch them. I eat crappie, but it's not my primary reason to go out and catch them, to eat them, but that's what most people's are. One of the things with crappie, when you hear me talking about them, the places where I fish them at, and we'll get that out right now, I fish them at Long Lake and I fish them at Hayden Lake. Okay, that's where your biggest crappie are going to be at that I've found. Fish, 10 to 13 inches, 14 inches, 15 inches. When I go fishing, I want to catch the biggest fish I can. That's what the show's based upon. That's what I enjoy doing. So, Long Lake and Hayden Lake. Now, that's not to say there's not big crappie in Coeur d'Alene. There are. The biggest crappie I ever caught was out at Coeur d'Alene Lake using a big pike spinner bait. Okay, but they're harder to find there. All right, the fish you catch in the smaller lakes, Twin Lakes, places like that, they're 7, 8 inches. They're this big. Hard to get a fillet off of. All right. So my preferred, Long Lake and Hayden Lake. Now, what I do in all my seminars, guys, is I talk. I've got some baits that I'm going to show you. But the thing you have to understand, like I do with all my seminars, is understand the fish to understand how to catch it. You understand the fish, you'll understand what to use to catch it. All right? It's not always about the bait. All the time it's bait, 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 bait. What were you using, what were you using, what were you using? Where were you fishing? That's the question. How are you fishing? All right? Crappie are different in a lot of ways. A lot of people don't realize that your best crappie fishing can be done in the low light hours into the nighttime. Okay, middle of the day, crappie fishing, it's not that great. Early in the morning, late in the evening, low light conditions. Crappie are primarily suspending fish. That's what makes them tough to find a lot of times, because they suspend. They may be out over 50 feet of water, 20 feet down. So you're fishing in the daylight hours when the fishing's tough. You're fishing totally away from where you think you should be at, because they're out here, and in the evening time they want to come to here. So what we're going to do is take you through some of those trends and get you to understand that. We'll talk a little bit about ice fishing for them. And there's some things with ice fishing, be it perch, crappie, or anything else, that happen down below that you don't understand. And once you understand that, then you're going to go get those fish. All right? The drop shot method is my favorite way to catch crappie. Reason being is I can suspend the bait up off the bottom because they're suspending fish. All right? So let's start out. We'll talk about springtime. Springtime, you go into the back of Hayden Lake once the ice starts to come off, and you'll see guys stage out off the points, out in the front of those bays, because that's where those fish want to go. They want to end up spawning. So they're in their pre-spawn phase. So what you'll have, let's just take, there's a spot bay that goes back in like this here and runs back. And what you'll see, and I had a guy email me, said, Seth, you guys know the percentage triangle, right? I talk about it all the time. And I always talk about contour lines. If this is the point here, these contour lines are tight, and then these get shallower back here, and that wider gap means a shallower slope, and this tighter gap out here, right here, means it's deeper. When I'm bass and pike fishing, walleye fishing, I use these. I use them when I'm crappie fishing, but what you'll see, and I had he's one of my best customers. I've taken him fishing a time or two, and he emailed me and says, Seth, everybody's catching crappie, and this is the bay right here, guys. They're catching crappie out here. These guys are out in the center. You say the percentage triangle thing, those fish in the early part of the year, they should be on the deep water like the bass and the pike are. And I said, well, correct, Mark, your thought process is correct. But do pike and bass eat crappie? Right? Well, if you got a high concentration of predators here, what's the next best thing out here in open water? Because they're suspending fish. So they're out in the center of this bay, off of this point, but they're suspended. You go to Hayden Lake when the ice first starts coming off, you're going to see a whole lot of guys out there fly fishing. All they're doing is using an indicator, 8 to 10 feet, however deep the weeds are. They got a chironomid pattern on there, a scud, leech, whatever it may be, and they're fishing out over this vegetation out in the center of these bays. Everybody always wants to go, when we think panfish, bass, any of that, we want to get right on the shore, okay, right away. When in fact, our big bass and pike will be out off this deep break, our crappie will be more out in the center of the bay, suspended there. Now, a crappie can feed on several things. And the fly guys will outfish, they'll outfish me if I'm not fly fishing in the springtime. Reason being is they're using small stuff. Okay? When that ice comes off and the lake starts to warm, all you little invertebrates, larvae, they start moving. Okay? What a chironomid does, that's the first thing when we go out trout fishing. They just they don't move much. They just kind of go squirt up and fall and squirt up and fall and squirt up and fall. And they're making their way up into the surface film to climb out and hatch. They'll be some of the earliest ones you see flying around in the springtime when it's cold. Sometimes you see it in winter. Like, why is that bug? Well, it's a chironomid that came off. Okay, it makes no sense in the dead of winter, but you'll see one. That's the most abundant food source, which they are occurring out in these weedy areas. The chironomid are. Now, the crappie, what they do, their spawning is typically, temperature-wise, is right around with the bass. You're going to see crappie on beds, say around 56 to 60 degrees. They'll be easy to find. They'll be just like the bass. They'll be back up in this reed grass underneath these overhanging trees, and they'll be bedded up back in there. Now, there's something that occurs, and if you don't believe me, go out to Fernand Lake and you'll see this. You know the back end of Fernand Lake, and I don't like to go to Fernand because the crappie are small, but I've done it when I was a kid. The back end of Fernand Lake. Everybody familiar with Fernand Lake for the most part? Okay, I'll draw this for you. You go all the way to the back end of Fernand Lake, and you're driving the road, and there's a bay like this. There's that old crummy boat ramp that comes in, right? And then there's another bay right around like this. Okay? Somewhat familiar to you guys? Okay, here's what happens. You go out there, and the guys will watch it for the ice to come off. Now, this shoreline is a northern side shoreline, so it gets the most sun exposure, so it warms up the fastest. This bay will thaw before the rest of them. There'll be no open water, and you'll get back here, and this bay will be opened up. You go out there at night, as soon as that thing opens up, and all you're going to see out here along the road and all over out here is lanterns and people fishing. And they're fishing at night right when the ice comes off. Okay? Now, something that happens when the ice comes off, there's two things. When you guys hear about winter kill, and we'll get into this when we get around to ice fishing, but when you hear about winter kill, okay, winter kill happens, everybody says, well, the lake froze, like, you know, your high mountain lakes, well, it was a winter kill. Well, it must have froze solid. That is not it at all. What it has to do with, when your ice gets thicker and thicker, and then you get a layer of snow on top of that ice, what is this doing? It's taking away light, correct? And when you don't have light penetrating into the water, your phototrophs, which are organisms, be it plant or animal, that convert carbon dioxide into oxygen, are no longer making oxygen. So what happens is your parts per million of oxygen starts to drop to an undesirable level where it gets tough for them to live. When the ice first comes off and you get sun happening here, as soon as that sun starts to happen, you start to get that photosynthesis, right? That's the whole reason why we're here. Without photosynthesis, none of us would be here. There would be no oxygen. By the sun coming and warming this water, and the light more importantly penetrating the water, the oxygen starts to develop here. So what happens? You've got fish all over in here. This thing breaks. Where's the highest concentration of oxygen? It's right here. Okay? They go out at nighttime because crappie are low light feeders. So there'll be a time when that ice first comes off, you can go out at night and literally slay the crappies. Nobody goes out and do it. There's just a few diehard guys that do it. But that's the reason why. All right? So always watch how the ice is coming off. And it's always going to come off on that northern shoreline because the sun's to the south. This shoreline here is shaded, so it remains cooler. The wind also blows out of the west, which in turn helps to break that ice up. The warmer air, all right? So going out in the springtime, if I was going to do it, and don't worry, if you're not a fly fisherman, you can go get a bobber, 4-pound test on a spinning pole, Buy some beadhead chironomids. Anchor off in those areas, okay? Out in the center of these bays. Like I said, you go to Hayden Lake, you're not going to have to look real hard because there's going to be guys all over here, okay? Anchor up. If the wind's coming in like this, which it typically does, throw your bobber up, try to keep it just above the weeds, and just all you're doing is just letting it work down through there. You're presenting the chironomid, which is the first forage, which is most abundant for them to eat. Now, as your water warms up, and you guys saw the show on Long Lake, one of the first ones I ever did in town here, where we were catching the crappie drop shotting, and we're going back, 3-4 years now. Okay? When that water temperature, and that was done at Long Lake, when that water temperature gets to, that day it was around 45, 48 degrees, I think. What I start to do at that point in time is I start to look for isolated structure. So what we had, and I'll draw this out to you and show you. Everybody familiar with 9 Mile Resort? You guys been on it? Okay, I'll draw it because you're familiar with it. And I did some of the fish right there. So the river goes like this and makes a hard right. You've got 9 Mile Resort launches here. Comes out, and this is just all pretty much like this. Then it comes and the river cranks like this, and it cranks like this. And this goes up like this, up towards the dam. Little Spokane dumps in here, correct? Okay. Well, right here in the summertime, guys, those of you who've been there, what does all this look like in here? Shallow and weedy, right? In the springtime, none of that stuff is there. When you come out of here, out of the ramp, you go down this way. And if you look in my Secrets of Locating Big Fish DVD, you'll see an aerial photo of Long Lake in there, when I'm talking about this. When the river comes down and it makes a turn this way, this is the deeper side, right? The side opposite of that is the flat. So what happens, within this area here, you've got really deep water. There's a little red house up there. Looks like a barn. Right where that little red house sits, it just goes, the shoreline gets deep. You come in from there, and you got a few docks, you got some brush piles in there, okay? And then there's a little rock point that comes out here, just a little tiny thing, and another dock here. And what you'll find when that water temperature, like I said, it was 48 degrees, it probably towards the end of the day it may have gotten up towards 50. What I'm doing, because those fish have been out in this open water, suspended, now what they're doing is they're starting to get the urge to come in to spawn. So what they do is they come into the first bit of structure, okay? Everybody wants to go way back up in here, and there's some nice docks, there's some brick walls in here, but it's this deep. And they will end up there, I promise you. They will end up there. But what they're doing is they're just moving in here a little bit, and if things get bad or weather conditions get bad, all they do is just slide out. They don't want to travel a great distance. To swim up to here, to get on a dock or a brush to ambush prey, not a problem. To swim all the way up into here, being cold-blooded, being that the water's cold. When the water's cold, their metabolic rate is low. They don't have a ton of energy to expend. They're not going to push all the way up in here in one day. They're going to sit out here at the tip of this triangle, and they're just going to work these pieces here. Typically what happens is the first 2 or 3 big pieces of structure right there will hold the most fish. So we go in with the drop shot method and we work those, all right? And what you'll find is this. Now, I don't ever anchor up. I get that a lot. How do you work those shorelines, Seth? Well, I got an electric motor on the front and I just work down the shoreline. Now here's what will happen, a bigger picture, and this is pretty much how it is on that one spot. You got a dock here, and then there's kind of an overhanging tree right in here, and then you got another dock right here. All right? When you first come in, you can sit on this dock, backed up off of here. The reason why I don't like to throw anchors is because it makes a lot of noise. It's a distraction in the water. Keep it calm, keep it finessed, whatever. And you'll catch fish here first thing in the morning. And you may fish this dock for an hour, because they're schoolers. and you're going through the color changes and the different baits, and you continue to catch fish, because when you're fishing on a school, when the bite stops, change something up. Go from a minnow pattern to a leech pattern to a small, like the little 2-inch fish fry. Go to a different color, because you're sitting on fish. They've seen their buddy get pulled out of there a couple times, and they've seen your bait sitting in there for 20 minutes. They're there, just change up the color. As the day progresses, you'll see them go from here to underneath this tree. To the middle of the day, they'll be pushed back up in here, because this water's a little bit shallower, so it's going to be a little bit warmer because it's getting more of the light's rays. Okay, so it's warming more. In the middle of the day, you're on the inside, and all of a sudden this starts slowing down. You go through your color progressions, you go, okay, that's not working. You just slip right back to here. Because what they're doing is they're going to come out here in this deep water, and that's where they're going to spend the night. Walleye, bass, pike, crappie, wintertime, springtime, fall time. You start deep, you work shallow, and then you go from the shallow to the deep. In the summertime, you start out shallow, they go out deep, they come in shallow. It's a reverse. So you're following that school in as it's moving in. Okay? So cold water periods, deep to shallow, the completely opposite in the summer. Okay?